welcome back to a new Girl Culture podcast. I'm your host, Molly Wills-Reed. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I am super inspired about this conversation. And, you know, a lot of my guests up until this point, if you have been listening, you may or may not realize that there has been like a woven nature to all the women that I've had. I've either known them in my past or have just been connected with them very organically and on a personal level. Like, these are not people that I have cold called or emailed necessarily. And I've been really intentional about that because I take this platform seriously, and I really want the women that come on here to deeply represent and align with the values that I believe God is sort of leading us as girls and women back towards. It's something that I take super seriously. And the guest that we have today is really the ultimate and epitome of this idea that God weaves our stories together in such a beautiful way. And I want this to encourage you, because if you are thinking about building something or you don't really see how God is connecting the dots in your life today in this moment, I want you to realize that He is building something far greater than you can imagine. That every conversation, every person that you meet, you have no idea the power that it holds. You have no idea what God is doing behind the scenes. And one day, when the timing is right, He will reveal how He is weaving and building your voice, your platform, your purposes, whatever that may be. And I can't wait for you to meet our guest today, because our story has been woven together for a decade, almost a decade now, but we had no idea. And it's truly only the work of the Holy Spirit. So I'm going to give you a little intro. Our guest was an NCAA swimmer on UPenn's women's swim team, where she navigated the men and women's sports issue. Paula is a believer and a passionate advocate for girls and women. And I am so honored and excited to welcome Paula to our new Girl Culture podcast. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on today.
I am so excited and honored, and I had to share that beginning piece, because it is true that everyone that has come on so far has somehow been connected to my life, whether I was aware of it or not. And it's an example of just trusting God to let Him do the work for you. And I can't wait to get into talking about how you have done that and are doing it. You're just an active example. But I feel like we need to talk a little bit about our story, because it's pretty unique and crazy.
Definitely. I mean, it was when I got connected with you, I just said, okay, there's so many people, friends try to connect me with. I was just like, okay, like, nothing against you, but like, it's just going to be another call.
Totally.
And after that call, I was like, oh my gosh.
This is so crazy. Yeah.
Just so unbelievable. So, I don't know how we want to get into that, but
yeah. So I'll start, because I remember it's one of those things where I'm gonna look back. I'm gonna remember where I was when I was talking to you. I remember when I started to cry. Like, it's like that, just very like personal kind of. I felt like the presence of God in such a strong way, and I'll just never forget it. So if you have been listening for a while, you guys know that I lost my brother to brain cancer, and he was a really big swimmer, which I don't think I've really ever talked about, but he made the Olympic trials, and we all were swimmers. So I was raised in a swimming family. And so when I was introduced to Paula, I've always cared about this specific UPenn story. Has been very important to me for personal reasons and like professional reasons. So when I was told that I had a mutual friend with Paula, I like was really excited to talk to her. So I, of course, led with my family is a swimming family, and I said, you know, my brother was a big swimmer. He went to Notre Dame, and sadly passed away from brain cancer. And then there was like a pause, and you were like, "Wait a minute, is your brother Connor Wills?" And then I don't think you could tell, but I just immediately, I mean, whenever I hear someone say his name, because we don't really say his name that much anymore, um, I just started to cry. And anyway, so you can share the next part, but he was a coach. He coached you in swimming.
Yeah, and so as soon as you just said Notre Dame, and obviously you guys have the same last name, I mean, I knew obviously who it was, but I don't think I actually even told you this on the phone. I didn't realize that he had passed. Um,
Oh
and
wow.
so that was actually very shocking to me. I mean, I like was processing it after the call. I called my
Mm.
mom, like I had no idea. And that just shows, I think, really, I guess how disconnected I was from. I wasn't really talking to a lot of people I grew up swimming with. I'm sure one of them or someone, if we had all still been in touch, would have reached out or it would have been something we talked about. But to be honest, the kids I swam with growing up, I moved to a different club team in a different town in a different area. So I was in CT swimming in middle school when Connor coached me, but I moved to Metropolitan, which is the New York City area teams. So I was very disconnected from a lot of the people that I had swam with growing up. And so that was actually not something I even knew, which was I think that maybe someone had maybe brought it up maybe in passing or had I don't know like it didn't completely surprise me or I knew that he had had brain cancer. I knew that it was bad, so I think maybe it didn't completely shock me, but I didn't really process it until later that day. So
Wow.
which was yeah, which was really heartbreaking to I mean like that's not even like a way to describe it, but for lack of a better explanation. But Connor was a huge part of my swimming career growing up. I remember the first time I made YMCA nationals. I was 13 years old. I placed dead last in the event that I qualified to be there, and I'm not exaggerating. Nobody even got disqualified, so quite literally, Paula Scanlan was the last name listed.
Hmm.
Um, and I remember, Connor was just like, it's okay, keep trying. I remember I had to do a time trial in an event I didn't even want to swim. And Connor was the one who stayed back with me at the pool because our head coach was dealing with the other swimmers who were making finals and actually swimming real events that day, and nobody else was there to hang out. And Connor just said, "Yeah, I don't really care if I have to spend the entire afternoon waiting for a 13-year-old to swim in 100 free. It's really slow."
If you're a
And
swimmer,
so
you know that pain actually.
yeah, and so obviously, I remember there was like this. I have to go back and look at my parents' house, but there was a time when someone got me. We would do these secret posters, and you would, make a poster for someone before the swim meet. And the person who picked me was like, I think he was a high school boy, and he was like, I'm not doing this like small child's poster. And so Connor stepped in and made it. And so
And I
just so many
remember, I feel like I remember all of that. It's just crazy.
Yeah, there's just so many memories, I think, of that. And obviously, I mean, such an impressionable time of my swimming experience growing up that eventually led me to continuing to swim in high school, to swimming in college.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously that's just such a weird,
it's
weird
crazy. And
I
I think, what I kept thinking when we were talking, which you obviously didn't know this side of my brother, but there's been a few situations where I've been like, oh my gosh, like there's bigger forces at play here connecting me to this person. You are one of like two other stories where this has happened, and it has all of the notes of my brother. Like he was very passionate about politics. He obviously didn't talk about that like on the pool deck, but we always joked that if he was not involved in swimming or then he got into finance, if he didn't go into finance, like I think that he would have been an incredible politician. Um, not because he's skeezy. He's like the opposite, but he's like so smart and like he's just one of those people that like says the least but says the most at the same time. So we would always joke that he would get into politics. So and you're very involved in politics now. I mean, it's like the calling and platform that God is clearly opening up for you right now. And so I can't help but like feel like Connor, I'm not going to be like woo woo, and I don't know like the realities of how this all works, but God definitely connected us. And it's certainly a beautiful indication that, um, you know, things are always working together for the good, whether you're aware of it or not. And even though my brother is not here, I now kind of get to experience part of him through our friendship in a weird and like kind of surreal way. So it's a real, I find it so encouraging and so inspiring. You just never know how God weaves things together, you know?
Definitely. I mean, even the person who connected us, I met on in such a weird when
Yes.
there was so Desi, she runs a church in my hometown Greenwich where Connor coached, and my old nanny from when I was little, I was home one weekend at my parents' house, and I just said, I want to hang out with you. Like, what are you doing this weekend? And she was like, oh, well, I'm going to church on Sunday. And I was just like, can I come? Um, and she was like, oh, yeah, but like, just so you know, it's new. It just started. There's like maybe 15 people that come, just so you're aware. And I was like, I don't really
Yeah.
care. And
Yeah.
I go, and it's Desi's church. And so that's how I got connected with her. It was when I'm not home as often on the weekends anymore, but this past summer I had sort of made the decision to move back to my parents' house just because the summers are nicer and I was on the road so much that it didn't even really matter where I was based. And so
Yeah.
I would go to their church a lot, and that would be yeah, that was it was just fun because I would get to get to see this my family friends and all these people who have been part of my childhood, and that's how I got connected with Desi, that I just was like, yeah, sure, I'll come with you to your church.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, and again, it goes back to this idea that, you know, the relationships you build matter. People that God brings into your life, which is why I find I'm so prayerful about the people that I surround myself with and intentional about it, because I think when you do put the time and energy into God's sort of like weaving, you get experiences like this. You have encounters where you're like, oh my gosh, how do we? And I mean, it probably happens to everybody, but I think there's just a level of like depth and trust that happens in these situations. Like, I automatically just like trust you with like my social security number. Like, I'm like, you know what I mean? Like, and that, maybe not my social, but it's like, it's just so, I don't know. It's so amazing. And that's another reason why okay, so let's get into your faith, because I think that's clearly like such a thread here. Um, and did you always have a relationship with God? And when did that sort of happen?
Yeah, so we grew up, so my dad's Catholic, my mom's not, and so we grew up going to both. I do still, I mean, I think I'm in one of those positions where I do really enjoy so many aspects of the Catholic faith, and I do feel very close to that. But I'm also, again, if someone who's part of a different denomination wants me to go to church with them, I will go. I'm very open to all of the different sort of, I mean, methods of
That makes
Christianity. I
sense.
think that
I'm like that the same. I used to be like a professional church hopper.
I still am, to be honest. Like every weekend, it depends which friend is talking to me. I'm like, where are we
Yeah.
going? And I don't know. I think that that's something I'm still trying. Sometimes, like, that is hard for me. I feel like there needs to be an answer. Like, why would God have all of these different denominations? And so that's something I personally struggle with a little bit. I mean, maybe as we all do. I feel like
For
it is,
sure.
but each of them really does bring so many different things. And I think ultimately the overall goal is as many people that can come to Christ as possible. And if there's a denomination that reaches someone that doesn't reach, and a different denomination that won't reach them, I'm for it. And so I think that's where I stand on those things. And so growing up, it was really confusing for me though, because again, my dad is Catholic, my mom was raised Presbyterian. And so it was really interesting. We would go between the two. We would have times where we'd go to Catholic church and not. So that always confused me from a really young age. Um, and so as I grew up, I obviously believed in God, but I wasn't sure really the specifics and things like that. And it wasn't until honestly in 2020, during COVID, it was really hard because we were all sent home. And again, I would still do some church activities. I'd go to church occasionally, but I wasn't feeling particularly close to God at that time. But in 2020, during COVID, I just remembered feeling super isolated and just weird. And that was really when I started to feel like I wanted to be more involved with the church community, not just going to church occasionally on Sundays, but really trying to deepen my relationship, but also have a community of people that were also Christian. And so I
Hmm.
wouldn't say it was until 2020 where I really started to feel like it was really centered to my life. And it was weird because it was in 2021 when Leah Thomas joined the team. And so it was this experience that was definitely really, really hard to navigate, but also I could lean on my relationship with Christ a lot through it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think there was ever a point I didn't
Preparation.
really believe, but not just that it was, I realized I could really rely on God for everything. I think that I didn't really
Well,
have that realization until 2020, if that makes sense.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like,
no,
some
no,
other people.
no, it absolutely does. I mean, I think you were becoming a young woman. You were entering like harder, probably having harder conversations. You were dealing with like life, navigating life and things that were not necessarily cut and dry. Like when you're younger, things are a lot simpler. Right? And I kind of had a similar experience too. I mean, it was like when I started to enter the real world and recognize that I could not save myself, that I was totally like at the mercy of like the craziness of the world, and I needed someone and something to help me navigate this, is when I recognized, okay, like there needs to be more of a relationship here. Um, so it makes sense, right? And then I see it as like a, preparation, because God was really protecting you in a sense, because you were about to enter a really challenging part of your college and sports career, and you had something to help answer these questions, because as we see, the world and like a lot of culture is not defending your case. So let's back up and talk a little bit about that whole situation. Um, Waverly Girl is not necessarily political, but I am political. Molly Reed. um, but Waverly Girl, I'm trying to be really discerning about what we champion and what we talk about. And that is for all of my listeners to understand that I do not feel the need to die on every hill. That's not where I feel God calling me in the political space. I mean, like, I don't need to die on every political hill. There are
Mhm.
certain political hills that I will die on, and this is one of them. I do not believe it is at all acceptable nor aligned with God's biblical design for us to allow this men and women's sports issue to continue. So I'm really like, as you can tell, I'm getting a little fired up here. Um, so let's talk a little bit about that whole situation. Like before it became an issue, like was it a shock to the system when you guys recognized that there was a biological male on allowed on your team? Was he on the team up until that point, or was it just 2021 that he was sent to the or allowed to swim?
Yeah, so there was a huge lead up. So I go to Penn as a freshman in 2018. My freshman year was, I mean, in circumstances for this, it was normal. Of course, there were so many ups and downs and challenges and all the things that come with D1 swimming and college and living on your own. But in 2019, I show up for my sophomore year, and the very beginning of the year, beginning of September, we have a mandatory team meeting where the men's team have their meeting first, and then we are going after them. And we're a combined program. We have the same coaches. There's never ever been a time where we've ever had a team meeting that's been separate because everything that needs to be announced to the team is announced to both the men and the women. So I remember thinking that that was really bizarre. The men leave the team room. They do not say anything to us. They just go into their locker room. And then the women are told to go in. And I noticed there's a member of the men's team just waiting back there. And I'm like, why is he still standing here? The men are done with their meeting. And our coach just goes to start the meeting and he's still standing there. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is happening right now? And he looks at this male swimmer who was named Will at the time. He said, Will, this is your meeting. And before he even speaks, I'm like, this cannot be good. And he looks at us, and honestly, it's said in under a minute. This is less than a minute of my life. He just goes, hey guys, I just want to let y'all know, I'm transgender. I'll be transitioning to your team next season. I'm going to announce my name change later, but please refer to me now with she, her pronouns. And that was the
So
entire
they didn't
conversation.
even, they gave Will the floor. They didn't even do any sort of like lead up to that.
No, it was like the whole meeting was less than 5 minutes. Um,
Wow.
but I
So bizarre.
remember I was I was sitting towards the front of the room, so I couldn't really see people's reactions behind me. And so I'm like standing there, and I'm honestly, and I tell people this and they laugh, but I was choking back laughter. Like I genuinely thought that this was some type of practical joke
Yeah.
or somebody was making, just seeing how we'd react, or maybe there was some like candid camera show. Like I don't know, like that's truly what went through my mind because first off, Will was the tallest person on both the men's and the women's teams together. Like he was the tallest person on the men's team at the time. And also, he wasn't great. He wasn't a Connor level swimmer at the NCAA stage, but he was really good for the Ivy League. So he was actually a top Ivy League swimmer. He just wasn't qualifying for the NCAA championship because the Ivy League, again, is not as fast as other
Right.
programs in the
It's
D1.
like A, B, whatever, if you want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so people don't usually, like Riley, who's become a close friend of mine, right? Everyone at Kentucky is going to the NCAA championship. That's not happening in the Ivy League. You get one or two qualifiers per year per team,
Right.
if
Right.
even. And so
Yeah.
that's what a lot of people don't realize is that even for the Ivy League, he was really, really good. So this was going to be a loss to the men's team program in a way.
Yeah.
And it
And he
was,
did that because he wanted to make NCAA, or he wanted
I
to
don't,
make.
I mean, I don't know. I truly, I can't know his reasons. I mean, I know that he was, a spot or two away from qualifying for the NCAA championship on the men's team in the previous season. So that's something to look at. But I honestly don't know. But what was so shocking to me is at one point I did have the instinct to turn around, and I turned to the rest of my teammates and everybody was clapping. They were saying, we're so proud of you. Thank you for coming out. We're happy for you to be your authentic self. That was the language that people were using. And so this happened in the fall of 2019. It wasn't until 2021 that he actually suited up and started competing on the women's team. And so it was a 2 year process of
Right.
prolonged stuff. And I talk to my brother a lot. My brother and I are very close. But this is, I will not take credit for this, but my brother explains the 2019 to 2021 situation as a slow moving train wreck. That is
Yeah.
exactly how he explains the lead up to how I got from that meeting in 2019 to him competing and eventually winning a women's NCAA championship, because that is how the story gets resolved. Um, and so that is, yeah, that's how it started to go down. And again, it was weirdly and slowly. He was still on the men's team. He was out as a woman, saying that we had to refer to him with she her pronouns, but he was undressing in the men's locker room. He was still competing on the men's team. He was
Okay,
still.
so that okay, so I didn't realize any of this. I mean, I guess we hear a lot about, the whole how he won
Yep.
and there's a lot of focus on just the total like tragedy that that is in itself, taking away from the women that should have won. But so he was leading up. That was 2019 that you had that meeting, and then that was at the end of the season.
No, this is the beginning of my
Oh, that was at the
sophomore
beginning of the season.
year. So
So okay, so he was then still swimming on the men's team in the men's locker room. But so they were like warming you up. Like it's like so sketchy how
it
like
is, yeah. And so I'll share. So what's interesting though is I haven't spent a lot of time before while this was happening, and even in my journey and first speaking out about this 2 years ago now, um, talking to the men's team about how the men felt because
right.
a lot of people never really sat down to ask the men's team. And so we're having a lot of, I don't know what God has been putting me through lately, but I've been reconnecting with so many people from different parts of my life in different chapters. And
Mhm.
so just the other week, I actually saw a member of the men's team from the Penn men's team. And I just chatted with him, of course, because everyone knows what I'm working on. And I asked for his perspective on how everything went down. And he had said that he was changing in the men's locker room, and his most memorable moment was Will putting on his swimsuit, and it's a Speedo. And he said that one day the suit just kept going. So he was now putting on a women's suit, but in the men's locker room. And I never really thought about that, of how weird it probably was even for the men's team to see this happen, to experience it. And in a way, they don't really talk about it because it wasn't really their problem because again they weren't losing fairness in competition, but it affected them too. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize
Psychologically.
is that there's just so many different people that were affected by this. That wasn't just even, what you saw at the NCAA championship with that notorious photo of all the girls and Riley and all the other girls,
Yep.
frowning on the podium. That's one photo up. There is years and months of people and information and situations, and it honestly even was a large thing on campus. Like I remember I would go to class and I'd have my athlete backpack, and this is by the time he was already actually competing, and people would see that I was on the swim team and people would ask me questions. I remember one time in a project I got paired up with some guy on the football team, and he didn't even want to do the project. He was just like, what is going on, like what is happening?
Yeah.
um
It the whole idea that we're supposed to accept this of 0.6% of society and make it normal for the majority of people who this, can gravely affect in a bad way. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And it's so crazy to me that we just thrust this onto society without thinking about the consequences, without thinking about how this can really negatively and harmfully impact not only girls, but boys. So let's go back to when you said the girls were clapping when you had that first meeting and, just in support. What were the weeks and months after that? Like, what were the conversations that were happening in the locker room? Were you the only one that was raising the flag, or like, how did that all go down?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, so flashback to when this happened. I mean, my first instinct is I think that night after practice, I hopped on the NCAA website, and I remember I had dinner with some friends who weren't swimmers, and I think it was all I talked about at dinner. I think my non-swimming friends were ready to just like actually just be like, I don't want to talk to you anymore because it was all I could talk about. And I remember I was telling my parents and whatever, and so this happens, and then obviously we all start to have conversations, and I had one-on-one conversations with pretty much everyone on the team that I was pretty good friends with. It was something that came up. I remember this one very vividly. There was this one girl in the grade above me, and she was very left-leaning, and she was a biology major. And I remember we got lunch one day, and she had said to me, I know biology, I know science, this is not fair. But what's so funny to me is that same girl, a couple years later, when this is all happening, is posting all of these infographics and support, is talking about how wonderful it is. And so that was something I saw. It was a lot of people, you could have these one-on-one conversations where they would agree that it was wrong or agree that it was unfair in some way, but then to the group or on their social media or, you know, publicly, they would talk about how wonderful it was and how it was this great experience. And so that was something I saw very, very quickly
Yeah.
happening. And again, I think truly, for the most part, even at a very left-leaning university and college-age girls, I would say the majority, 80 to 85% of my team in one way, shape, or form agreed that it was wrong. And that's also telling because when this after this happened, many girls went to our coach and said, "Hey, you know, is he going to be changing in our locker room?" And our coach said, "No, no, no, he won't be. There's a single stall family bathroom in the hallway outside of the men's and women's locker rooms at the
Yeah.
pool." And our coach had told, I didn't have this conversation with him directly, but I had heard this from many of my teammates that our coach had said he was going to be changing in that locker room and that he wasn't going to be in the locker room. And I remember thinking, oh, you know, sigh of relief. But of course, in 2021, when he's a full-fledged member of the team, at this point, he is in the locker room. He has a locker just like everyone else, and there was no further follow-up conversation at that point in time about it. And I think part of the reason, and this is what a lot of people don't realize about the story, is the Ivy League canceled all athletics in 2020 to 2021. And so actually
Right.
2020 would have been the season he would have started competing. And he was supposed to graduate in 2021, but he took a gap year and came back 2 years later. So it delayed him actually joining the team. And then on top of that, we had all lost an entire season of competition. So many of us, when we showed back up, we were just grateful to be allowed in our locker room. I remember they had, you know, during COVID shut everything down. There was bins of, they'd cleared every locker out after COVID for people who couldn't pick up their stuff. And we were 2 years later, essentially, like, or a year and a half later, we were digging through the bins trying to find, you know, whose gear bag was lost or who had lost their suit and goggles. All of that because, again, we had been locked out of our
Right.
facility for a year, essentially.
Yeah. It's like the timing of all this is kind of nutty. Like, it's like, and talk about just like processing. And did you guys have, were you able to talk to anybody about this, like in leadership, or was it sort of something that you were just not, like you were to accept it and deal with it on your own terms?
Yeah, that's essentially what we were
Basically.
told. It was just, it's your problem. He's on the team. It was just like business as usual. But again, I think part of it for even me personally, like I went into that season very, very, very well aware that this was going to be an issue.
Yeah.
To what extent, I don't think I ever could have imagined. But I think part of it was, again, it was my senior year. I hadn't taken an in-person class in a year and a half. I was just grateful to be on campus seeing people that I hadn't seen in a year and a half. Again,
Right.
we
Yeah,
went
right.
online for 3 semesters, so all of 2020, all and then the spring semester of 2021, all online. I hadn't even been inside a classroom, and I was studying engineering, and so a lot of our classes were lab based. I was grateful to even be allowed back in the
Just be
labs
with
that
people.
we had
Yeah.
paid, so much money to have an education in.
Right.
And
Right.
so I think part of it is that overshadowed a lot of it. And also keep in mind they're forcing us to wear masks, right? So we have this weird masking protocol where you're masked on the side of the pool. And so a lot of that, and we're being forced to
Just like a
take
bad
COVID
movie.
tests, you know?
Yeah.
We're getting tested twice a week, and if get contact traced, you're banned from practice for 2 weeks. Or if you test positive, you can't swim for and other sports teams are dealing with the same thing. This is not unique to the swim program. So I think a lot of that was really, we were just thankful to be there,
Yeah.
frankly, to be allowed to
Right.
compete, to be allowed in
But there
our
was probably an element where you were like, were you having like this sort of internal battle, but at the same time, you're like, I just want to get on with my life. Like, I want to live and study and be with people and community. And then you have to like kind of navigate this other crazy, strange situation. It's like, it's a lot to process for someone who's what, 20 years, 21 years old?
I was 21 when that season
I
started.
mean, it's just, it's so clearly. I read a quote the other day that just gave me so much encouragement about our faith because it's like It said something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing, I'm going to totally botch it. I wish I had my book to grab right here, but it's like faith provides you a comfort high above under the wings and something like that. And without your faith and being able to fly high above under God's wing, you get lost and tangled in the brokenness of the world. And I just think that one thing that is going on, this is one symptom, right? What you have dealt with is one symptom of a broader problem where we are as a culture and society so tangled, so stuck in our everyday brokenness that we cannot see clearly and recognize the destruction that we are just allowing. I mean, and this is why I'm so passionate about the whole, not only women's sports issue, but girlhood in general, because we are looking at stats in the girlhood space that are tragic. I mean, like 55% of girls starting at age 11 have some sort of mental health disorder, whether it's anxiety, loneliness, eating disorder, something that is clinical or could potentially be clinical, and yet we're just supposed to like sip our lattes and sign up for dance class and pretend like everything's okay, and then I look at the situation that you were in, same sort of thing. It's like, where is our concern for these young women that are being exposed to this, that have been told their whole life that they can do anything, and now all of a sudden they're up against standards that are completely unfair? Like, so I want to hear, obviously, you have not been silent on this issue. And I'm so proud of you because I know offline you've shared with me you've lost friends. You have had to navigate some really challenging things, but you know that you are pursuing God's design and purposes for girls and women, and that's what ultimately is propelling you. So, why do you care so much about this? Like, can you give some context to that about why this matters to you?
I mean, I think it matters in so many ways, but I think for me personally, like why this spoke to me is when I started seeing first it affecting girls who were high school aged and younger. And so I might have mentioned this to you, and I talk about this a lot, but the story of Peyton McNabb, high school volleyball player out of North Carolina,
Yeah.
horrible situation. If people watch the video, honestly, it's disturbing, but she's knocked unconscious by this male player on the opposing team and permanently injured, was not able to play sports really ever again, really changed the course of her life. And I saw that story, and I first realized at that moment in time, because again, this issue is still starting to come up, I realized that this was actually affecting girls who were younger than me, because I think, in a way, for me personally, this is not the case for every athlete. Getting to college was the goal. I honestly didn't really set many goals in swimming past just getting myself onto a D1 team. Obviously, there's a lot of girls who have aspirations to go on to the Olympics, but for whatever reason, that was where I sort of saw the end of my career, where I saw the end of my goals, where I saw that was just the final thing that I had come up with. And I was there. So no matter really how it ended, I had made that. I had accomplished that goal. It was to swim D1 in college. And so in a weird way, I almost didn't feel as maybe disappointed as I might have if I had wanted to keep going on. But when I saw this happening to high school girls, I brought myself to where I was as a high school student, to how much swimming meant to me at that age. I think even going back to the very beginning of time when I really started taking swimming seriously back when I was 11 years old. I mentioned this, I was dyslexic growing up, and so I was really struggling in school at times. My brother was very, very intelligent. He also went to the University of Pennsylvania, dual degree, double major in a program.
Well,
that
you're an
accepted me.
engineer and you're dyslexic, so I think you made it. But
I figured, I mean, eventually, but at that point in time, I didn't
no,
feel
no,
like,
yes.
yeah, that I had
Yeah.
something, and swimming was really where it didn't matter that I couldn't do as well in school. It didn't matter.
Yes.
All these other factors, I was at a level playing field to my peers. And so
Yeah.
I think about and then carrying that through high school and all of these different things, it was just this constant I had in my life. And I said, okay, if you put a boy in 14-year-old Paula's locker room or on her team, how would I have reacted? And I said I would have wanted to quit. And the thought of that is really why I fight for this, is because it's about that generation of athletes. And this is not about winning. And I think a lot of people look at the situation, especially the other side that criticizes us, what they call people like Riley a sore loser. Or they say, you're just not a very fast swimmer, so you're just jealous. And this has never been about winning a trophy. This has never been about who can win the NCAA championship. This is about the respect and dignity for us to have a fair and level playing field to accomplish those things. And even if you place dead last, there's still reward in being at these competitions. And what a lot of people don't realize is the real losers of the NCAA championship are not the girls who were at the podium second, third, and fourth to Leah. Yes, they lost, and that is disgusting, and they all should have been up a place. The real people who lost out on this are not those girls. It's the girl who placed ninth, who got one spot away from even qualifying to be in the finals, and who would have known what would have happened in that final because she would have had the opportunity to race to win for first, and now she's denied that opportunity altogether. And that is what a lot of people don't realize, that again, the bigger people that we're fighting for in this is, again, not for winning an NCAA championship or an Ivy League championship. Well, of course, those people deserve those records too. It's really about those people who are trying to qualify for the next meet. And I think that is why I think I wanted to be so involved, is seeing that, again, when other people were having this conversation, really talking about it, there wasn't a lot of awareness for those people who maybe just quit altogether because they don't want to compete against the male, or for the people who are one spot away from qualifying, or the person who was denied the opportunity to compete altogether because this male athlete took a spot.
100%. And it goes back to Waverly's whole mission of building a healthy girl culture. You can't have an expectation that we want healthy girlhood, we want healthy womanhood, we want to achieve all of these things, and not recognize the fatality of allowing these, again, small statistics to be acceptable and interfere with the development, and expect there to be no fallout. Like, it's like we want one thing and then we're doing another, right? And we have to recognize that there are consequences to these decisions, that little girls' hearts and minds matter, that confusing them is detrimental to their future. And like you said, their desires to maybe stay in sports and continue what ultimately, because we recognize as believers that God has a calling on our lives. And so don't we want to do everything we can to encourage and persuade young girls to follow that calling and understand that calling? And that requires, allegiance to biblical values and virtue.
Absolutely. And I think that's something, especially in college. I remember, there's just not a lot of people that are believers on these college campuses. And I remember, we had this youth group that youth group isn't really the quite, but there was these women who would run a Bible study, and I would keep in touch with them in college, and they would check in every so often. But I just remember feeling so disconnected from that when I went off to college. It was so hard to find people on campus that were believers. I remember my freshman year, I wanted to go to church on Easter, and I asked 20 people on my college campus before I found one that was willing to go with me. And that was my first year on college, and I remember, and I still remember the girl who said yes. Her name was Catherine, and she lived in my hall. And but it was, that to me, I think, was really shocking. And I remember there's just so many people that were so disgusted by Christian faith, and even moving forward. I remember I went off to my corporate job that I worked for a year before I started working in the political world. And I remember this one day, I don't know why this came up in conversation, but we were sitting at our desks and um, somehow Christianity came up, or faith, or going to church. And I just remember being like, yeah, I'm a Christian. I believe in God. I go to church every week. And the guy sitting next to me, I had sat next to him for months, gives me this look of disbelief and just like judgment, and is looking at me like, what? Like, I've been sitting next to you this whole time. I had no idea. And I was like, oh, I don't understand why that's so shocking. And he was like, nobody in New York City goes to church. And it was just this.
Oh my
And then I
gosh.
almost had this moment where I was like, am I presenting myself in a way that I shouldn't be? Because if you know me, you should know that I would conduct myself this way. And I hope that people would know, meeting me, that I'm a Christian. I mean, I just remember being like, oh, maybe I'm not doing a good enough job of talking about this and bringing this in conversation. So, but it is a world where it's not popular, it's not fun to people. I mean, to me it is, and I love it. But it's just, we really lost that, and I think these college campuses really pull people away from that.
For
There's
sure.
not a lot of emphasis on it, unless you obviously go to a Christian
Christian
school or
school.
whatever. But especially not in the Ivy League, and
That's a
I
whole
just
nother
be
conversation.
very well aware of that. And it was an effort to stay connected, and I think that's something I hope to give people, encouragement to continue to be part of.
Yeah.
And we did find a great group, and there's so many people from college that I talk to still that are very looped in with their faith, and I'm so grateful for them. But it was definitely hard to come by.
Yeah. No, I mean, we're we're committed to building an army of young women that represent Christ in a way that is hopefully effective and inspiring, because ultimately, following Jesus is the best uh, secret to life you can have. It's the only way. And it's like once you experience him and the truth of his power, you can't go any other way. You can't. I can't imagine my life without Jesus. And so I'm with you. I'm like, I want to tell everyone and live as an example of how he's impacted my life, how he's allowed me to get through some of the hardest things that I could never have imagined would be my life. But here I am, and here you are, and you are able to boldly stand up against, I think, will be in history, one of the greatest um, attempts to take down women and girls. I think Riley said this the other day. I saw a quote, uh, how we have sort of come into this fourth wave of feminism. And Waverly Girl is here to say, okay, I believe, and I'm just putting this out there, we'll see where we are in 2 years. But I believe because of us, there's a collective group of women that are committed to like seeing this go, in another direction. And I believe that this feminist attempt is going to die out, and we're going to see a new generation of women that may not be as loud or um, manipulative as what we've seen in the past, but there will be a different example of how to live your life as a modern woman, where we recognize the value of girlhood. We recognize that little girls grow up to be little women, and that those women are who lead and um, raise children and build legacy. And it's like something has to give, because again, if you look at the stats, the feminist movement has not created a culture of happy women. And it has led to a lot of, I think, tragic outcomes. And this being one of them. So that is for another conversation. But I'm just saying, I think we're going to see a split.
I mean, I think we're kind of already there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and
I
it's going to continue,
Yeah, I
you
think that
know?
there's definitely a lot of disconnect, and I think there's a lot of people who are realizing that this is not, what they wanted it to be, and
Yep,
and I think even just, I mean, not to make this political, because I don't want this to be political. I mean, I work in politics. I do see things that are, I'm
well,
trying.
there's overlap because
Yeah,
it's culture.
yeah, it's true, but I think that the biggest thing, I mean, I saw personally in this past election, though, is just how many women actually came over and voted differently than they did in 2020. And this is not just people I know personally, but this is just like they've done polls and they've done studies. And so many people pointed to this issue being why they
Yes,
voted for Republicans. And I think it shows that above anything else, I mean, there's so many other, and not to say this issue is minor because it's not, but there's so many other things that you can be voting on. And this just, people were like, wait a minute, I've had
yeah,
enough. This is nonsense, and I'm not going to stand for it. So I think that that's just telling to where the cultural shift is. And again,
totally.
the other thing that's so interesting about this issue is really truly most people agree. It's 79% of Americans. The New York Times did a poll that came up with that
Yeah,
number. That's the majority of everyone. And I think that there's hardly anything these days that you can get 80% of Americans to say they agree with.
totally.
Um,
It's true.
so it really is sad that we're, again, have to work so hard on this issue, especially when so many people agree. And I think part of
I
it comes
know. But
with
that's also a media problem, right?
yeah, but I think part of it though is that there's so many people who, like I was saying, don't agree with this, but are not going to say something. So
That's
you
correct. That's
talk to
another
them,
problem. Yep.
and they're like, of
Yep.
course, and then you bring them and put them on the University of Pennsylvania
Yep.
swim team, and they
Yep.
are calling you a bigot for your opinion, even though they believe the exact same thing.
Yep. We need to pray for courage because there is a lack of courage in our culture, which is why people like you are, I'm so attracted to in, not a weird way. But I like am drawn to women that are courageous because those are the people that are going to change the world. And there's maybe a deficit, but I'm seeing, I think, there's a lot of, I think, hope that, like you said, we're here, we're seeing the split happen, and I am confident that it's going to continue to trend in our favor because there are a lot of there are maybe not as many popular opinions, but there's committed individuals who will see this through, like ourselves. And so that gives me tremendous hope. Um, and, at the end of the day, like you said, you don't want to make this political, and I try to do my best to discern when to bring things up. And at the end of the day, it's a values thing. For me, it's a values thing. I align with a biblical worldview. And anything that does not support a biblical worldview, I'm out. And I think that I pray that Christians at large will be convicted on that because that's really the problem. But
Yeah, I see a lot of that too, where there's a lot of different people who try to paint it in a certain way. And I think the thing I saw, and even other Christians that I knew in college dealing with this situation, there was really this difficulty of managing wanting to be loving as a Christian, but
yes,
also, well, the truth is that you are a male, and people were saying, well, it's not loving to say that, and the balance between love and truth, I think, was the biggest thing I felt from myself, from other Christians
for
that were
sure.
on, at the university with me, and I think my takeaway that I came to eventually is that the loving thing to do is to tell the truth, and there are
That's
different
right.
ways to do it.
Yeah.
And I think when a lot of people on the other side, or people who criticize me online, say, well, you just hate Leah Thomas and you're jealous and all of these things. And every single time I do an interview, I say, this is not about Leah Thomas. I barely brought him up, and I frankly barely do, because it's not about hating on the individual. I disapprove of his decisions to compete on the women's swim team. I think that's clear to everyone. But it's not about criticizing him as a person or saying hateful things. It's saying this is what happened. This is the honest truth to how these things went down. And this is why we need to fix it, because it's not truthful. And God made you the way that he did, and he didn't make you a woman for a reason. And
That's
just because you feel that way doesn't mean that you have access to our opportunities and our spaces and all of that. And I think that was, as a Christian, that was the hardest thing I dealt with. So I think that's something we need to work on, and maybe not rebrand, but have open conversations, because of course you want to be loving, and that is a huge part of being a Christian. But there is also this aspect where we do have, we have to tell the truth. I mean, God calls us to do that. God calls us to be honest, to be forthcoming with all these things. And I think that balance between those two things, I noticed was probably the biggest challenge that I saw people
100%.
struggling with.
And I think that's, I would say, if you were to poll, that's what most people would say is a struggle: how to communicate the truth in love. Ultimately, when you love someone, you want what's best for them, right? You want their heart to be set free. You don't want them to be bound up by chains and their brokenness and confusion, and not living out, again, who God designed them to be. And so providing that clarity and conversation has to be at the center of this issue. So I can't wait for more conversations with you. I feel like I'm being conscious of time, but I could just talk to you for hours. Thank you so much, Paula, for coming on. And I admire you and your bravery so, so much. And I look forward to doing so many more things with you. Yes. And watching you develop into this amazing woman and leader, because I no doubt God has big things in store for you, and I'm just excited I get to watch and now be connected again with you. So thank you for being you and here.
Well, thank you for all that you do, truly. I mean, I say this to so many people. I mean, I obviously am involved with all of this because it was forced upon me by a university. Well, not forced. I mean, I am grateful, really, for being put in the position that I am. But for people like yourself, I mean, you just have chosen to help platform this and to talk about these issues without, again, being directly put in a situation where you have to. And so I'm really grateful for people like you that have been part of this. Again, that, you didn't have to. You don't have to interview me. You don't have to waste your time doing that. And so I really do appreciate you, and also just your continued work, and just, again, watching all that you're called to do, because I know there's great things. And so just getting to know you has been wonderful.
Oh, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. And there's power in numbers. So God's clearly weaving us together for a reason. And I'm excited to see what that leads to. So thank you, honey. And I hope you guys have enjoyed this conversation. I definitely have. And this podcast is for girls everywhere. We will see you next time. Bye.